Racist cop pours coffee on a quiet black woman. He had no idea who she raised. It wasn't a scream, nor a punch, but a cup of coffee poured onto a 64-year-old black woman that shook the entire nation. And the most painful part wasn't the temperature of that steaming liquid. It was the cold silence that cloaked the entire room, where every gaze looked away, every heart stood indifferent. Before we dive deep into this story, let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts. On a windless but steel-cold January morning, Louisa Hall, a woman with a slow gait, a floral headscarf, and worn canvas shoes, stepped into Morning Brew Cafe, just as she always did. The cafe, tucked at the corner of Willow and 12th, measured barely 30 square meters, filled with the scent of cinnamon waffles and faint jazz murmuring from ceiling speakers. Louisa always chose the second table by the window, where the morning sun slanted through the frosted glass, casting golden streaks like an old friend's familiar hello. She usually sat there, writing a few lines in her small notebook, or penning birthday cards for her grandchildren, 3 in total, the eldest just starting middle school. To the staff, she wasn't anyone notable, just Mrs. Hall, who sat quietly, ordered her usual black coffee with no sugar, and always left the exact tip down to the last cent. But to many in the community, she was a quiet cornerstone of Ridgeway, a retired special education teacher who had helped dozens of children learn to speak, walk, and stand tall through unwavering patience. Just as Louisa took her first sip, the door swung open and the bell chimed cold and sharp. Archie Rollins walked in, wearing a crisp police uniform, shoes polished to a mirror shine, and eyes sharp as razors. Rollins needed no introduction. Everyone in Ridgeway knew him. He was born in the next town over, dropped out of college in his second year, and used a short police training program to climb to the rank of patrol officer. He wasn't known for courage, but for his scrutinizing glares, crude chuckles, and the way he wielded authority like a weapon to assert himself. He stopped at Louisa's table. His eyes didn't ask. His voice dripped with arrogance. "That's my seat." Louisa looked up, her smile still there, but her eyes dimmed. "I've sat here every Wednesday for 3 years," she replied, her voice soft as a breeze. Perhaps if it had been someone else, he would have smirked and walked away. But for Rollins, an elderly black woman daring to sit still and not yield was a thorn he couldn't ignore. He didn't give a warning. No threats, no knife, no gun. Just one simple act. He picked up Louisa's steaming cup of coffee and tilted his hand. Dark brown liquid streamed onto her simple beige sweater. The hot liquid hit her skin. But she didn't flinch, didn't scream, didn't utter a word. She just sat there, shoulders straight, eyes locked on him. And then, silence blanketed the room. No gasps, no apology. Just the faint clink of a spoon against a glass at the coffee counter, and a few glances turning away, as if nothing had happened. Louisa gently set her coffee cup down. She wiped her hands with a small napkin. Then, she stood. Quietly, as though stepping out of a light rain rather than rising from a midday humiliation. In the corner of the cafe, a teenager named Jada, 16 years old, her fingers still dusted with pastry crumbs, managed to start recording. She had no idea that the clip would surpass 2 million views within hours. Didn't know that the woman just humiliated was the mother of the newly appointed police chief, Carter Hall. Didn't know that that cup of coffee would be the spark to ignite an entire system long asleep in the paralysis of unchecked power and prejudice. And this was only the beginning. Louisa Hall did not cry. Not a single word of complaint escaped her dry lips. She simply stood up, her hand still warm with the scent of roasted coffee, smoothed out the wet fabric of her blouse, and looked straight at Archie Rollins. Not with anger, not with fear, but with a gaze heavier than any scolding, a gaze that had once taught speechless children how to speak through their eyes. She used that very gaze to silence the entire room, forcing everyone to witness. "You just made a very big mistake," she said, her voice like wind whistling through pine trees after a storm, thin but chilling to the bone. Rollins sneered, half from confusion, the rest because he didn't understand or hadn't yet understood, that the woman standing before him wasn't just a stubborn old black lady, but the very person who raised the man he saluted in internal briefings, newly appointed Police Chief Carter Hall. Above Louise's head, on the wooden bulletin board next to the entrance, where people usually posted lost cat notices or piano class ads, hung a faded photo. A black man in uniform, his expression resolute, standing before the American flag. The handwritten caption in faded blue ink still read clearly, "Proudly raised by Louisa Hall." A teenage boy sitting near the cashier raised his phone to snap a picture of it. Across the cafe, Jada, the girl who had filmed the video, sent it to her Discord group with a simple caption. "You guys won't believe this." At 9:43 a.m., the video appeared for the first time on Facebook. A student account named @JadaPaintsTruth posted it with the caption, "White cop pours coffee on elderly lady over a seat, but he doesn't know who her son is." Within 90 minutes, the video surpassed 12,000 shares and was re-uploaded on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. The hashtag #CoffeeCop started trending like an underground current, then broke into a flood. It wasn't just a video anymore. It was outrage in a tangible form. The first comments were furious. Then came the stories. Black mothers from Atlanta, Boston, and Milwaukee began recounting their own experiences of being ignored, humiliated, and silenced in spaces that were supposed to be safe. By 10:12, #CoffeeCop ranked among the top 3 trending hashtags nationwide. At 10:47, a journalist from WBN News contacted Morning Brew Cafe to verify the incident. The cafe owner declined to comment, but the barista, Monica, whispered with a shaken voice, I just witnessed history." Meanwhile, Rollins sat in his precinct office, typing up a patrol report. He had no idea his name was now being discussed in Reddit forums. Didn't know his home address had already been tracked down by internet users. Didn't know a tidal wave was forming, and he was the epicenter. Across town, on the 3rd floor of the Ridgeway Police Building, Carter Hall, 42 years old, tall, often described as a man who speaks little but listens deeply, was in a meeting with unit commanders. His assistant, Stephanie, walked in, holding her phone, playing the video. Her face was pale. "You need to see this," she said, placing the phone on the table. Carter didn't ask a thing. He looked at the screen and saw his mother, soaked in coffee, yet rising with pride. Her face appeared crystal clear. The same face he had seen every morning for 42 years, from the time he tied his shoes the wrong way to the day he held his diploma from the National Police Academy. He didn't need to hear the rest, didn't need to reach the 38th second. Carter stood, without a word, without taking his files, without saying goodbye. He walked into the hallway, where the air had yet to realize it was about to be ripped apart by a storm. A storm with no rain, no thunder, just one force: the truth, and a man who would no longer allow anyone to trample his mother or justice ever again. Carter Hall entered the Ridgeway Police Headquarters at 11:22 a.m., as the sky outside still hung heavy with rain and the wet pavement mirrored the traffic lights like a cold, slick mirror. His shoes were soaked, the hem of his pants spattered with mud, but his gaze was deep-eye. Devoid of gentleness, stripped of any trace of the son who had just watched his mother be humiliated. No one at the station knew exactly what had happened, but everyone felt something had broken. A heavy, unfamiliar air clung to the hallways. All they knew was that Carter had left a strategic meeting midway, a first since he took office, and he returned without calling his assistant, without a press interpreter, without a microphone. There was no table-thumping rage, no wall-shaking shouts. When Carter walked into the duty room, where Rollins was filling out his patrol sheet as if nothing had happened, he spoke just one sentence. "My mother didn't need to call me. I came here for justice." Rollins shot up, flustered. I thought she was just a regular civilian." "Just an elderly black woman, right?" Carter cut him off, his voice calm, but every word slicing through the air. Rollins stammered. His lips trembled, scrambling for a justifiable excuse. But Carter didn't give him a chance to breathe. "You didn't know who she was. And that's not the problem. The problem is, you thought she wasn't worth knowing. And that's why I can't let you wear this badge another day." By 11:35 a.m., the suspension order for Archie Rollins had been signed, stamped, and delivered to the Internal Affairs Department. It stated clearly, "Suspended from duty, without pay, pending an independent investigation under the oversight of the mayor's office." Less than 20 minutes later, the notice was leaked online. An anonymous account shared a photo. "Rollins suspended. Ridgway's quiet is gone." At 12:10 p.m., the original video had surpassed 2.7 million views on Twitter, 1.2 million shares on TikTok, and nearly 4,500 comments under the post by the student named Jad, the one who recorded the entire incident. Media outlets across Michigan swarmed the story. Local CNN dispatched a full crew to Ridgway, while the New York Times began sending investigative reporters to interview witnesses. Ridgway Police Headquarters became the eye of the storm. Cameras, microphones, protesters with signs, and reporters jostling at the gate. Outside was boiling. Inside was frozen. Carter didn't step out to make a statement. He didn't hold a press conference. He simply sat in his office, took off his wet coat, opened his notebook, and wrote the first line of a reform. January 5th. My mother was the victim today. But in the past 10 years, how many others weren't caught on camera? Begin reviewing all complaints from 2015 to the present. No exceptions. He called the head of HR. "I want all closed complaint files without investigations. I want the reasons each case was dismissed. I want the name of the person who signed them off." In the hallway, eyes averted. Some officers stared down at their shoes. One forced a smile and pretended to check their meeting schedule on their phone. No one said anything, but no one felt at ease in the presence of their chief anymore. Not because Carter had done wrong, but because he had begun to remind them that the law exists to serve the people, not to protect those who abuse it. To Carter, what happened to his mother was no longer personal. Rollins was just a symptom, and the disease eating away at Ridgway was silence, was apathy. The paperwork was rubber-stamped. It was the officers who wore the uniform and forgot why it was given to them. He looked through his office window and saw the glint of microphones, cameras now pointing at the door. It didn't matter. If justice needed a torchbearer, he was ready to stand in the fire. Not to be praised, but so he'd never again have to bow his head in front of his mother. At 2:45 p.m., while the wall in front of the Ridgway Police Headquarters was still covered with signs reading, "Justice for Louisa," Carter Hall's internal inbox chimed with a sharp ping, like a warning. Sender, anonymous. Subject, the history of Coffee Cop. There was no opening line, no greeting. Just 6 attachments, bluntly named, Complaint 2016 Rollins, Complaint 2017 Rollins, Complaint 2019 Rollins, Internal Memo. No Action 1, Internal Memo, No Action 2, Draft Report unfiled. Carter opened each file. Every page was a blade slicing into the false quiet of the system. 3 complaints against Rollins, 2 from Latinx residents insulted at a checkpoint, 1 from a teacher pulled from her car for failing to retrieve her wallet fast enough. 2 internal memos signed by Rollins's superiors stated clearly, "No misconduct found. Recommended not to proceed with investigation to preserve unit integrity." But the most alarming was the 6th file, a report that had never been filed. No signature, but a full account of an incident. Rollins threatening an elderly woman after she refused to hand over her vehicle documents until he spoke in a respectful tone. Carter printed them all. Every sheet. He underlined critical details in red ink. On the final page, he scribbled with firm strokes, "Launch full investigation into all complaints from 2013 onward. Prioritize cases closed without cause." 3 hours later, Carter descended to the basement of headquarters, known as the Graveyard of Paperwork. The air reeked of mildew, blended with the stench of rotting paper. No one came down here unless they had to. The room was lit by 2 flickering fluorescent tubes that buzzed whenever someone entered. Files were stacked in columns, many boxes with sagging lids. Some still bore stamps dated 2008. In the first 2 hours, a temporary review team, consisting of a records clerk, an internal affairs officer, and Carter, sifted through 634 case files. They found 217 unresolved complaints, including 37 that had never been opened, 49 missing verification signatures, and 19 in which the accused officer had written their rebuttals using forged signatures from the alleged victims. A young female officer, Isla Bennett, recently transferred from Ohio, whispered as she reached file number 58, "We're holding the map of corruption in our hands, and no one's ever dared to read it." Carter didn't reply. He was standing before a wooden cabinet with peeling edges, its label faintly marked. K-Series, 2015 to 2020. He pulled out a gray box, the layer of dust so thick he had to blow on it to see the text. Inside was an old CD, taped with a handwritten label. "Traffic stop, November 2nd, 2017. Creel." Carter knew that name. Daniel Creel, veteran officer, never disciplined, but always made Carter feel a chill whenever they passed in the hallway. He took the disk upstairs, searching for the only computer still with a disk drive, an old terminal in the second-floor tech room. The screen took longer than usual to boot, but eventually the video appeared. No audio, just footage from a dash cam. A black sedan was parked on the roadside, headlights dim. A flashlight beam sweeps across the windshield. Officer Creel entered the frame, hand near his weapon, signaling the driver to exit. The driver, a young black man, around 20, stepped out with both hands raised. Creel rushed in, slamming him onto the hood with no clear provocation, no struggle, no resistance, just brute force. The passenger side door creaked open. A young girl, slight build, around 14 to 15 years old, peeked out, hands raised, face confused. Creel yelled something, but the video had no sound. The girl flinched. The car door slammed shut. The video immediately cut to start. See, like the feed had been intentionally interrupted. Carter paused, rewound, captured stills. The girl, her terrified eyes, lips pressed tight, a face that couldn't be mistaken. He searched the student records of the local school district. 3 clicks later, the profile loaded. Name, Jasmine Carter. Age, 15. School, Ridgeway High School. A note in the margin made Carter's chest tighten. Reported missing for 1 night in November 2017. Later, found unharmed. No charges filed. The system had forgotten that girl, but Carter wouldn't. Not this time. Not under his watch. And certainly not while the stains of coffee still clung wet to his mother's blouse. That day, at exactly 8:47 a.m., Carter Hall called a closed-door meeting. No secretary, No public notice. Only 3 people were in the room. Carter, Lieutenant Janine Cole, the head of Internal Affairs, and Corporal Daniel Creel. Creel entered with a swagger, his eyes unwavering. He'd served in Ridgway for 14 years, received 6 commendations, and had never faced disciplinary action. To him, this summons felt like nothing more than another tedious administrative formality. He even smirked as he sat down across from Carter. "So, I'm being interrogated over a traffic stop." He squinted. "That was a long time ago." Carter didn't answer right away. He pulled a color photo from an envelope, laid it on the table, and pushed it toward Creel. The image had been taken from the CD footage, a frozen moment. The girl in the car, eyes wide with terror, hands raised, lips sealed. Jasmine Carter, 15 years old. The night of November 2nd, 2017, Carter said, his voice like steel scraping between clenched teeth. "That girl stayed silent for 7 years. Because of you." Creel glanced at the photo. His shoulders tensed slightly, but his tone stayed flat. "I remember that case. Plates were unreadable. I stopped them for a check. Nothing serious. You shut off the camera. Camera malfunction. Happens all the time." "No," Carter said, producing another document. "This is the internal maintenance log. Your camera, Unit 487C, was fully operational before and after that night. No errors reported. No repair requested." Silence. Creel folded his arms, his gaze starting to waver. But Carter pressed on. "You were the only officer present. The report you filed was withdrawn from the system on November 7th, without explanation. Your name isn't in the official duty log. Why? Clerical error, maybe. Or maybe you thought no one would ever dig it up, especially since the victim was just a black girl from a high-risk zone? You thought you'd stay invisible forever?" Creel shot to his feet, chair crashing backward. "Are you threatening me?" Carter stood too, face to face. "Number, I'm ending what the system has let you get away with for far too long." He signaled to Lieutenant Cole. She placed 2 documents on the table, an immediate suspension notice and an order transferring the case to the Michigan Department of Justice for criminal investigation. At 1:02 p.m., the suspension notice was pinned to the first-floor hallway bulletin board, the one every officer passed each morning. Under the headline, "Corporal Daniel Creel, duty suspended," Carter wrote a single line in black ink by hand. "There is no justice without transparency." The news spread like wildfire. Within an hour, local media arrived for interviews. On Twitter, the hashtag #JusticeForJasmine began trending alongside #CoffeeCop. And this time, no one could dismiss it as an isolated incident. That evening, at the New Light Community Center, an open forum was held to discuss police reform. All 70 seats were filled. Another 30 people stood in the back. Among them was Jasmine Carter, now 22 years old, a sociology major at the University of Michigan, returning to Ridgway for the first time in years. She stepped onto the stage without a microphone, holding a printout of the photo Carter had laid on the table that morning. Her gaze no longer trembled like it had 7 years ago, but her voice still carried the cracks of memory. "I was pulled from a car, separated from my brother, without knowing why. I cried in an interrogation room where no one asked what I needed. I used to think maybe I didn't matter." She looked directly at the crowd. "And for 7 years, I was silent. But today, I am not forgotten." No one clapped. They stood, all of them, in silence. Because sometimes justice doesn't arrive with a shout. It arrives through a photograph, through someone brave enough to face the truth, and through a name the system once tried to bury that finally gets called again. This time, no one forgets. On Thursday afternoon, winter light filtered weakly through the tall windows of the Ridgway Police Department, casting a dull sheen on the frosted glass behind Carter Hall's oak desk. On it, stacked neatly, were resignation letters and early retirement requests. 9 in just 3 days, most from officers who had quietly shown up on Carter's internal audit list. 2 lieutenants cited a divisive work environment. 4 submitted urgent retirement requests, one of them not yet of eligible age. 3 others suddenly vanished from the duty roster, unreachable by any channel. Carter wasn't surprised. He knew that when light shines, shadows look for places to hide. But he hadn't expected the retreat to spread this fast. In a closed-door meeting with the command team, one lieutenant muttered just loud enough for Carter to hear. "Carter's turning the whole department into a circus." Dragging the public into internal affairs is a disgrace to the badge. Carter didn't respond with anger. No rebuttal, no pounding on the table. Instead, he brought out a 71-page report, neatly bound, and sent it straight to Mayor Evelyn Lasker's office. Inside was a detailed summary of 9 officers, each with more than 3 serious complaints filed against them in the past decade. Some cases had been closed in under 24 hours. Others had vanished without a trace. One file stated plainly, 13-year-old boy detained at station for over 9 hours without guardian contact. When she reached case number 27, Mayor Lasker, renowned for her toughness and adherence to principle, paused. Her hand trembled slightly. The story of the unlawfully detained boy wasn't just a line in a report. It was a testament to a system where silence had become standard practice. "I'll stand with you," she said, "but be ready. City Council won't take this quietly." A vote was scheduled urgently, an emergency session on Monday afternoon. The whole city buzzed. The news spread through every local broadcast and community blog. Carter Hall's authority under review. Independent Oversight Committee proposes limits on police chiefs' reform powers. The council chamber held 150 seats, but that day, nearly 300 people squeezed in. Civilians, journalists, activists, former officers, and college students. The air felt like a live wire, ready to ignite. Some held signs backing Carter. No transparency, no peace. Others opposed reform. "We need cops, not politics." The vote stretched over 4 hours. Each council member gave a speech, supporters citing data, opponents using emotional terms like division and betrayal of tradition. Final tally? 5 against, 2 in favor. The proposal to form a committee to rein in Carter Hall was rejected. At 6:14 p.m., Carter stepped out of the chamber, facing over 30 cameras pointed at his calm expression. His voice wasn't loud, but it rang clear. Nothing is more dangerous than a system afraid of being seen. That quote was reposted thousands of times on social media in the next 24 hours, accompanied by a photo of Carter standing in front of City Hall, shoulders squared, eyes unwavering. But not everyone admired him. That evening, as Carter left the police department, he discovered deep scratches on his car door, etched into the metal, spelling out with a sharp object, "Traitor." He didn't call insurance, didn't snap photos for the media. Instead, he opened the trunk, pulled out a bottle of metal cleaner and an old rag. Under the pale streetlights, Carter knelt and began scrubbing the letters away. A young officer, Reynolds, walked by and paused, as if to say something. But Carter simply whispered, without looking up, "If justice leaves scars, it's still worth it." And he kept scrubbing, just as he had been doing with the entire system, wiping away the layers of pretense, exposing the mirror of truth beneath. Even if his hands bled, even if the pain ran deep into his courage, he believed. Some systems are worth the sacrifice to make better. Inside Ridgeway Police Department, the chill didn't just come from the January wind. It seeped from the stairs, the prickly silences, the heavy footsteps echoing down hallways once filled with laughter and dispatch radio chatter. No one laughed anymore. No one spoke in the elevator. That thick silence clung to every corner of the precinct like a fog, and Carter Hall knew well. His isolation had begun. On the department's internal Slack channel, once used to share task updates and birthday wishes, anonymous memes now spread like wildfire. An image of a broom with the caption, "Sweeping it clean, just like Carter wants." A photo of an empty chair with the note, "Veteran seat, now cleared." A mocking sticker of Carter in a witch hat, labeled Chief Purifier. Carter didn't delete any of it. He read, took notes, and remained silent, like a stone in the storm. On Wednesday morning, in the weapons room, a middle-aged team leader, Deacon Weller, pulled his Glock from the locker, wiped the barrel meticulously, then looked around. In a voice half joking, half serious, he murmured, "Feels like we're the ones under surveillance now. Cameras and complaints hanging over our heads wherever we turn." What once was a law enforcement headquarters was now turning into a place of dread and suspicion. To prevent panic from becoming wildfire, Carter summoned the entire force to the ground floor assembly hall. No microphone, no projector, no assistants. Just him, standing alone before over 80 uniformed officers, half with heads bowed, half with arms crossed coldly. "I didn't come here to make you comfortable," Carter began, his voice steady and low. "I came to remind you, we're police officers, not a gang in uniform. If justice offends you, then maybe we should all reconsider why we put this on each day." An older officer, Jenkins, 29 years on the force, raised his hand. "You're making it hard for us to speak up. No one knows what's right or wrong anymore." Carter stepped down from the stage, didn't raise his voice, didn't lecture. "If you're afraid to speak when something's wrong, then all these years? Who exactly were the people supposed to trust? We don't have to agree, but no one gets to stay silent in the face of abuse." There was no applause, only a stretched silence, then eyes slowly lifted from the floor, turning toward Carter. A few officers exchanged glances. No one laughed mockingly anymore. Meanwhile, the aftershock from Jasmine Carter's speech had spread beyond Michigan to Ohio High, where a late-night radio program on WNLD aired her words in full. "I stayed silent for 7 years. But today, I'm not afraid. Because someone chose to look back instead of looking away." In a small bedroom in the suburbs of Lansing, a 64-year-old woman sat before a softly glowing television screen. On the coffee table, a cup of coffee was still steaming faintly. She wore an old beige sweater, a blue floral scarf loosely tied around her head, her hands resting calmly on her lap. Louisa Hall, the woman who had sparked it all, was preparing for her first public appearance. 2 days later, at the Black Ridge Community Center, Louisa stepped up to the podium. No bright lights, no fancy forum, just a woman who had lived long enough to understand what silence can kill. "I'm not a symbol. I'm just an old woman going for her Wednesday morning coffee like anyone else," she said, her voice soft but unwavering. But the way that coffee got poured on me, it wasn't an accident. It happened because someone thought I wasn't worth respect, because I'm a black woman, old, in worn clothes, and that I will not leave unspoken. No applause followed her words, but from the front row to the very back of the room, everyone stood up. No slogans were shouted, but every person, from teenagers to elders, from students to public servants, understood. This wasn't just the story of a spilled cup of coffee. It was the story of a system that once treated silence as law. And Louisa, the woman who once wrote diary entries for her grandchild by the morning brew window, now stood like a lighthouse in the fog. Not to change everything, but so that no one would ever have to be silent alone again. On Monday morning, a thick envelope bearing the Ridgeway Police Federation logo was placed on the editorial desks of 4 major regional newspapers, including the Ridgeway Times, Mid-Michigan Herald, and Capital Ledger. The content of the letter was an official statement, 1,200 words long, with a bold black ink headline, "Police Chief Carter Hall is undermining the unity and safety of the force." In the letter, Carter was accused of allowing himself to be politicized, creating a toxic work environment through excessive oversight and retaliatory purges, and reverse discriminating against white officers. Within 2 hours, radio stations picked up the story, and local talk shows lit up. A veteran host posed the question, is Carter Hall truly reforming the system, or is he just an angry man using power to get back at the institution that hurt his mother? The question didn't require an answer. It was designed to divide. But while loud voices filled the airwaves, a quieter movement was taking shape. Voices for Justice, a group founded by Black mothers in the city. On Instagram, they began posting short videos. Testimonies from women who had been pulled over for no reason, asked, "Do you live here?" or simply followed while walking home from the market. In just 3 days, their page gained 14,000 followers, and one post carried the caption, "I'm not the police chief's mother, but I've had coffee thrown on me, just in a different way." As the community began to recognize deeper issues, an audio clip suddenly leaked, heavily edited to make it sound as if Carter had declared he was targeting white officers. Soon after, a wave of posts, hashtags, and protest videos flooded social media. Some previously neutral individuals began shifting to the opposition. Carter made no statement to the press, no rebuttal posts. He chose action over argument. He reopened the internal security system's access logs and identified. Captain Harlan had accessed the audio database exactly 48 hours before the leak. After 6 hours of investigation, Carter made his move. He suspended Harlan, notified the state's Department of Internal Affairs, and initiated a special audit. The news leaked almost instantly, but this time, no one was surprised, because they had begun to realize that every move Carter made came with evidence. However, not all reactions came in the form of tweets. Thursday night, at 2:16 a.m., a glass bottle stuffed with cloth and gasoline, a Molotov cocktail, was hurled through the window of Mayor Evelyn Lasker's office. Flames licked the curtains, scorching the wood at the edge of her desk. The fire alarm triggered. No one was hurt. But a message spray-painted in red across the glass read, "Step back or burn too." Forensics collected samples, and the security cameras had been blurred with a damp cloth, an organized act. Carter arrived at the scene before the investigative team. He found the mayor standing amid the smoke and flashing fire truck lights, her hand gripping a soot-stained hat. "They didn't set this fire out of anger. They did it out of fear," she said, without looking at him. "Fear of the light. But I'm not afraid of fire." The next morning, the Ridgeway Times ran an editorial with a headline stretching across the front page. "We are witnessing a government standing firm, not through power, but through the courage to distinguish right from wrong." The article detailed how Carter's actions were not emotional but strategic, each step supported by documents, evidence, and principle. That afternoon, when Carter returned to his office, there was a brown envelope placed on his chair. No return address. Inside was a single typed sheet with one name in bold, Corporal Michael Bratt, accompanied by 3 case numbers marked in red ink, RWD-H167, INQ-X19, and DTB-2024-03. Carter called in the records investigation team. A young assistant said with a trembling voice, "These 3 files, they were labeled irrelevant and archived back in 2016. He picked up the phone and called the Michigan Department of Justice. The battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. On Tuesday morning, Carter Hall wore a charcoal gray suit and a deep blue tie as he stepped into the state government building in Lansing, where the Special Investigations Committee had convened a closed-door meeting regarding his reform efforts. The hearing room on the 4th floor wasn't large, but the chill inside was unlike the winter outside. It was the kind of cold born of power, of law, and suspicion. 7 committee members sat behind a long table draped in green felt, each with a thick case file before them, faces as hard as granite. 14 eyes watched him, unblinking, unreadable. At the opening of the hearing, one member asked, "Mr. Hall, why didn't you follow internal channels as required?" Carter answered without hesitation, "Because what we call internal has been used as a blanket to cover wrongdoing. It's where dozens of complaints vanished, where evidence was twisted into technical errors." Another asked, "Why did you make the suspension list public? Don't you think that created a negative perception for the entire department?" He looked directly at the speaker. "If an entire system feels threatened by the truth, then perhaps it's the system that needs changing, not the person who dares to speak." Beside Carter sat Janine Cole, the former records officer, R., once forced to alter her report on a 2015 assault case, later reassigned without explanation. This was her first public appearance since resigning. "I wrote the report truthfully," Janine said, her voice trembling but clear. "My supervisor said, 'That's not in the department's interest.' I never saw the original again." Behind them, in the public gallery seats, Jasmine Carter, the girl unlawfully detained by Creel at age 15, sat next to her mother, hand clenched tight. A committee member turned to Jasmine and asked gently, "Has anyone from the system ever apologized to you?" She shook her head. "Never. Until Mr. Carter sent me a handwritten letter and had someone visit, not to interrogate, but to listen." The room fell silent. A middle-aged member, silver-haired, a former commander of the State Patrol, tilted his head and murmured, "I served 19 years. This is the first time I've seen an officer apologize without adding, 'But I didn't mean to.'" Carter didn't smile. He simply nodded, hands folded calmly on the table. At the end of the nearly 4-hour hearing, after dozens of questions, cross-examinations, scenario reviews, and citations from over 70 documents, a final note was unexpectedly added to the official record. The reform actions taken by Police Chief Carter Hall, though not aligned with traditional procedures, are deemed reasonable, necessary, and an appropriate response to the demand for transparency in law enforcement. The news spread across social media and national outlets like lightning. Within 3 hours, headlines appeared. "Michigan didn't fail. Ridgway is leading." One police chief and how he fought an entire system with the truth. Courage doesn't need sirens, just an open hand. While the press swarmed City Hall, down south in Ridgway, at a small house with a wooden porch and white fence, Louisa Hall sat on her rocking chair, knitting under the brilliant afternoon light. She didn't go on television, didn't grant interviews. She remained silent, observing as only a mother who'd spent 30 years teaching children could. Carter arrived. He sat beside her, saying nothing. Just a quiet peace between two people who understood that the storm outside was never as fierce as the one inside, a justice long forgotten. Louisa looked at her son, a soft smile forming at the corners of her lips. "This is how cities wake up, Carter, not with a speech, but with one act that seemed small." He nodded, eyes fixed in the distance. "And I won't rest until it's fully awake." The sun sank slowly behind the oak trees to the west. But it wasn't the dusk of an old day. It was the light of something just beginning. And this time, no one turned away. On Monday morning, sunlight poured through the windows of Ridgway Elementary School's library like a quiet gentleness. In the small, multi-purpose room that barely fit 40 students, Carter Hall stood before a whiteboard, wearing no badge, no uniform. Just a man, and a story the whole town had witnessed. A 10-year-old girl in a lavender sweater with braided pigtails raised her hand. Her name was Amelie, and her question brought the room to silence. "Why did the police officer pour coffee on your grandma?" Carter paused, not because he didn't know the answer, but because he knew every word would be a seed planted in these children's hearts. He leaned down, placing a hand on the desk in front. Because someone forgot that every action, no matter how small, carries consequences, especially when it comes from arrogance and prejudice. Amelie frowned. "So, did your grandma get justice?" Carter smiled, not out of relief, but because he sensed something was shifting. She got her voice, and sometimes a voice, especially one that's long been ignored, is more powerful than punishment. A teacher at the back of the class quietly pressed record. That 94-second clip would spread like wildfire. But this time, it didn't contain violence. It wasn't an accusation. It was hope. Not just on Twitter or Facebook, but on small screens in criminal justice classrooms, institutional reform forums, and ethics panels. A small town in Michigan, once unremarkable, was now a textbook example of what had once seemed impossible: change from within. At the Ridgeway Police Department, Carter pinned one last sheet of paper on the wooden bulletin board in the hallway. It wasn't an investigation notice. It wasn't a disciplinary order. "To everyone who's ever been overlooked, I see you, I hear you, and I have not forgotten you." No signature, no official seal. But that line was photographed over 20,000 times, becoming the slogan for reform campaigns in 5 other cities. In the Central Plaza, once the site of modest fall fairs and parades, a mural was completed after 3 weeks, painted by a group of young community artists. 4 meters tall, stretching across a red brick wall, it depicted 9 faces. Those who had filed complaints, been pushed out for speaking up, or simply not believed. At the bottom, white letters on deep blue read, "Louisa didn't need to shout, because for the first time, the world spoke for her." 1 week later, the entire internal case archive of the Ridgeway Police Department, from 2000 to the present, was digitized and made public. 317 pages, including overlooked files, buried incidents, and unsigned reports. In the lower right corner of every page, an indelible line was printed: "There is no justice without truth." News of Ridgeway's community justice oversight model reached a national conference in D.C., where it was formally invited for presentation. Carter didn't go. He sent Janine and Jasmine, 2 women once unheard, now representing Ridgeway, to share a journey that no one listened to until they could no longer be ignored. Louisa Hall, on a quiet March afternoon, sat on her porch, an unfinished wool blanket resting on her knees, gazing out toward the town. Children's laughter rang from the nearby yard. A car horn echoed in the distance, and the scent of baked goods drifted from a neighbor's window. Everything looked the same. But inside her, something had changed, she murmured to herself, or perhaps to the wind. "My son isn't just a police chief. He's the bell this city tried to pretend it didn't hear. Now no one is pretending anymore." There was no need for applause, no need for a statue, because some voices don't need to scream to awaken an entire system. And Louisa Hall, the woman with her floral scarf and worn shoes, was an irreplaceable part of that symphony. If this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Watch the next video to see how the fight continues.